Hi everyone, Adam here with Surfside Ceramics, and today I'm doing the first of several videos that I'll be doing about how to prepare pots and do a crystalline glaze. I've had a number of years with doing the crystalline process and many successes and many failures along the way, so I thought I would share some of my tips for success so that if you're going to try doing crystalline glazing for the first time, or maybe you've been trying to do it and been having some problems with some of the elements of the pot preparation, that these tips may help you and help you have more successful firings. So crystalline glazes are really one of my favorite kind of glazes just because of the unpredictability and the uniqueness of the crystals that form on the pots. But with that, there are a lot of extra steps and problems that occur that need to be solved that don't typically occur with your more traditional glazes that have a lot of clay and a lot of other elements in there that prevent the glazes from running. And that's really the main problem with crystalline glazes, is how much they run, because what you're really doing is taking a normal glaze and over-firing it by about 5 or 6 cones to get it to the point where it's completely fluid and literally running off the pot, and then getting the crystallization to occur. So this is an example of a bowl that I've done, a small bowl, and it has a nice crystalline glaze on the inside and out, a little decorative bowl. And you can see the foot here looks really nice. It's been beveled, it's been polished, but it takes a lot of work to get to that step, and like I mentioned, there are a number of things that can be done to ensure that you can get to this step with the greatest amount of ease and set yourself up to be able to finish off the pot nicely and end up with a nice piece that hasn't actually broken and been subject to some errors. So I'm going to walk you through the process, some of the different techniques that I use, some of the things to note with your own pots, and I'm going to start with the bisque pieces. Now you can do bisqued, or you could fire these green. I think bisqued is quite a bit easier because of the amount of glaze that has to go on with a crystal pot or with a crystalline glaze. I use porcelain, my own blend of porcelain, and I'm not going to get into too much about throwing the pots or shapes or anything like that. I'm really just going to focus on, for this video, the feet and the setup with the catch basins. So with the feet, if you look closely here, what I've done is I've trimmed this foot down so that it has a really abrupt and sharp corner. That foot can get a little bit of curvature and a nice rounding to it that's smooth during the final grinding process, but having a nice sharp corner here is helpful for separating the next piece I'm going to show you, which are the pedestals. Now, many people will trim their pots for more traditional glazes with a bevel on the edge or with a rounded edge, and while that's fine, I'm going to show you that there are some areas that you need to be concerned with putting a lip on it like this, because this can actually create, if you're not careful, a spot for glaze to pool, which will then make it very difficult to get off the ring and can also crack the bottom of the pot when you're trying to separate it. So I've been using the terms pedestals, rings, catchers, and I want to show you each of these pieces individually and show you some of the different techniques and the ways that people make it. So generally there are 3 different ways that people will set up their pots, and I'm going to show you all 3 of them. The first one, which is a common method, is to actually make your catcher from the same clay body that you're making your vessel from, and to throw the center, pedestal or ring, and the catcher all in one piece. And this is a nice way to do it because it really allows you to have everything all contained. And the benefits are that you can, while you're throwing each of the pieces or trimming each of the pieces, you can set them up to be perfectly matched for the diameter here and the diameter on the bottom of your pot. I found that the downsides to doing this kind of technique with porcelain are twofold. One, it really only gives you one opportunity to fire the pot. Sometimes you may want to try to refire the pot, and the glaze will continue to pool, and also because of just things heating up and cooling down, the pedestal may come off on its own if you've done a very good job connecting the pot and the pedestal. The other problem too is that the catchers can stick to silicon carbide shelves. They can have other problems too, where if this kind of warps, it can allow glaze to seep in. And so I think this is a great method, but it's not my preferred method. Another method that people will use is just with fire brick, and they'll make a catcher, whether it's out of a stoneware or porcelain or recycled clay, it doesn't really matter. And then they'll take a brick, and then they'll put their pot on the brick. And this is a very simple and easy way to do it. Some of the problems that can occur with doing this is the glaze will actually start to eat away the brick. So it really limits your ability to refire the pot. It also can create some instability, where if a lot of glaze starts eating up the brick and it falls over, it can be a problem. If you are going to use this method, you really want to use some K25 brick, K23 or higher. I mean, it's got to be a brick that's capable of cone 10 or more. And those bricks can be a little hard, and you know, they can also be a little expensive. I think about $6 or $7 a brick these days. You chop them up, it ends up not being all that bad, but it is a bit of work. Creates a lot of dust. You need some other tools to cut these bricks. So if you are going to do the brick method, for the sake of having a clean foot, I really recommend trying to use something like a hole saw and cut your little bricks or biscuits out so that they match the foot of the pot. And you'll still find that as the pot shrinks during firing, that the brick won't really shrink and it will end up being bigger than the foot. What that means is you'll end up getting a bit of hardened glaze that sits a little wider than the rim of the foot, and then you have to grind that off, and it can make for some excessive grinding and also some chipping problems. So again, this is a fine method, it works. I've seen people have some success doing this by dipping this in kiln wash and then sitting that on the bottom just to prevent some of that brick erosion issue that I talked about with the glaze attacking the brick. But I'll show you the third method, which I think is the best for a number of reasons, and that is to use separate rings or pedestals and catchers. So what I do is I make my catch basins out of any clay that I can get that's a good cone 10 or higher clay, that's grogged for good thermal shock resistance, good thermal expansion, cracking resistance, because a lot of glaze is going to end up pooling in here. So in this case I have a brown stoneware. This has already been fired and used once. It's a brown stoneware with a lot of grog in it. And then I make my rings from the same clay that I make the pots out of. And the way that I can do this quickly is, if you can imagine, when I'm on the wheel, I'll actually just throw a cylinder of porcelain up in a skinny cone, and I'll do it on a taper, and then when it's leather hard, I'll come in and trim off and cut off each of these rings. So now really quickly in one cone I can get 10 or so rings, and when you do it on a taper, it gives you the opportunity to use either side when you're trying to fit it up to a pot. So this will fit one pot on one side, or if I want to use the other side, I could fit a pot with a little smaller foot. And when you're cutting these off, you want to give yourself a good inch, I feel. If you go anything shorter, you're going to have potentially the whole ring or pedestal sitting in a pool of glaze in the bottom. Now here's just some examples of what, after it's been fired, what this looks like. So here's my ring. You can see where the glaze ran right over the ring, and it's sitting in the pedestal. Now the second reason that I like to use this technique is because I can then use this for a second firing if I'm lazy or trying to reuse some of my materials and I can afford the height in the kiln, and I can do it 2, 3, 4 times, however many times it takes to fill up the pedestal. Again, that's another reason for using a grogged stoneware type material that will be able to withstand the extreme force that's going to occur from the buildup of the glaze inside the catcher. Here's an example of one that's, you know, I could potentially fire this one more time, but I probably wouldn't on this one. This was a white stoneware with some grog, and you can see I have used 2 rings, one on top of the other, and when I've set these up, I've set them up taking into consideration that things will shrink and move a little bit during the firing. So I used the ring on top of the other ring that was just a little bit smaller, so it shrunk down and still sat in there nicely. and then I separated it, and this is what I was left with. So again, I could use this one more time or not. Here's an example of one of the bisque pedestals that has been fired and the pot removed. And again, you can see that this is a very nice method and it worked great. And so ultimately, where we get to with things coming out of the kiln is they look like this. So here's a bowl. You can see I have my pedestal or ring in there with my catch basin and the glaze is pooled. And now this is ready to be separated. So I have a nice firm piece that I can heat up or chisel or use any method you want, which I'll be covering in another video. But this is ultimately how it's going to come out in the kiln. So now I'm going to show you some specific steps on preparing and putting all this together using these two techniques, the all-in-one technique and the separate ring or pedestal and catch basin technique, and show you how to help ensure that you have success in an easy separation of your pots. So as I mentioned, I have all my rings. I actually have a whole cabinet where every time I sit down to throw, I just make a bunch of rings. They get bisqued and they add to the inventory. So I go digging through and I find a ring that looks like it's going to fit my pot. And there's two elements to consider. One is the diameter and making sure you have the right fit, which I'm going to explain further in a second. And the other one is ensuring that you have nice flat surfaces so that when they mate together, no glaze can actually seep and run into the crack. So the way I achieve that, and I really feel like this piece of equipment has been extremely helpful for the crystalline glazing process, is using a diamond lapidary disc. And this can grind flat surfaces really flat, nice and smooth. I also use this for finishing the pots when I take them out of the kiln and I've separated them after the crystalline glaze fire. And I just made this little device here. I took a piece of steel plate that was sized to I think it was a 12-inch bat. I just epoxied it onto the bat, plastic bat. And then I use these magnetic backed diamond discs, and I can just drop this right on here and it's stuck on there, and now I have a nice surface. Now I'm not going to do too much grinding here, but obviously when you do any of your grinding for fit, you want to be aware of silica dust and silicosis and the health hazards there, so you don't want to do much grinding without wearing a respirator or in a well ventilated space. So now that I have my pot and I have a ring that I'm going to use for the pot, I'm going to show you how I determine the size of the rings. Now, what you want to do when you pick your ring size, and this applies to this method or if you're using the all-in-one method, is you really want the diameter of this ring to sit slightly inside of the foot. Line to line is good. You definitely don't want to go bigger. If you do, you're going to have risks of problems. I shouldn't say definitely, but if you go bigger, you're going to have risks that you're going to chip the foot when you separate it. So I've selected this ring, and if you see here, and you look very carefully, it's sized so it sits just inside the foot. And what's going to allow that to happen is as the glaze, when this fires, when the glaze flows down, it's going to flow, and it's going to flow right past that joint. If there's a step here, and this is sitting like this, let's say, but all the way around, the glaze is going to hit here and it's going to pool. And then as it's figuring out where to go, if there's any gaps in here, it's going to go in and it's going to really fuse this ring to the pot. So that's why I try to pick my rings so that they sit just under the edge of the pot and allow that glaze to run right past. Ideally, when these come out of the kiln, it's tough to determine where the foot and the ring differ, but usually with a little bit of skill, a little bit of practice, you can figure that out. So once I've picked my ring and I know that I have the right size ring for my pot, I come to my grinding wheel, and now you could do this with a piece of sandpaper if you're using bisque pots because they're soft. A piece of sandpaper on a nice flat board, plastic board, wooden board, doesn't matter. Any kind of coarse sandpaper. This is a diamond grit that's a 60 grit, and that's about right. You don't need to get into a fine polish here. And so what you can do, and this will probably work better if I take it off of the banding wheel, is take your pot and move it around. You don't need to put a lot of pressure. And I didn't do it excessively because these pots have already been ground once. They're actually pretty smooth, but do it slowly. And you want to do this dry because when it's bisqued, this will gum up pretty quickly and it's going to chatter and it's going to create some problems. So you just do this dry, well-ventilated space, or with a mask on. And you'll be able to tell, and you'll be able to look, and you'll be able to determine when your foot is actually ground perfectly flat. We're going to take that same step, and we're going to do it to the side of the ring that we're going to put on the bottom of the pot. All right? And now, when I put these together, you can see that they are dead flat together. If you put them together and you see something, even that one looks pretty good already. Let's say you see something that looks like this. You can see that gap in there. That's going to create a problem. Glaze is going to go in there and it's going to make it really hard to separate this pot without breaking the foot. All right? So again, take your rings, grind them smooth however you can. Make sure that they're not fitting like this. This is too big. This is about the right size. That one might even be a tad small. All right, and then grind them nice and flat so that they're basically lapped together. If you do that, you'll have pots that can separate from their catcher very easily. All right. Now, I mentioned pots, if you like to trim a bevel into your foot, that's fine. One of the things that you need to do if you do a pot like this is you need to size your ring off of the inside of the flat of the foot. Because again, the glaze is going to flow, it's going to run down, it's going to hit that angle. The movement is going to want to send the glaze into the crack of the joint of the ring and the pot. And so you want to size your ring so that it is actually smaller than the pot. This one's actually too small. But if I look at this catcher here, it's going to be really tough to see. But if you can see right in there that this one is sized such that off of the inside of the bevel that my catcher is sitting actually inside of there. All right, can you see that okay? All right. So, we've sized our rings, we've figured out our pots. All right, now we're going to join them together. All right. Now, the way I like to do my pots is I trim in a foot and then I do a nice clear glaze on the inside where I put my mark. Let that dry and then I'm ready to assemble. So, you want to lay out plastic, parchment paper, newspaper. Nice thing about using paper and newspaper is that although it will stick when your glue dries, it will just burn off in the camera, and you don't need to worry about it. So I have my little piece of paper. Here's my ring. Just double check this is the one. Yeah, that's the one. All right. I'll lay my ring out here. All right. Now, for the joining compound, I use a mixture of aluminum oxide, fine particle size, and Gorilla Glue, wood glue. I think you can use any wood glue, Elmer's or anything like that, and alumina. Some people will use a mixture of alumina hydrate or alumina and EPK. I found that actually sticks to the pots. So I just go with straight alumina and wood glue and water. Create a mix that's kind of like a heavy cream. Now the reason for the paper here you'll see is I'm going to put a heavy bead on this ring because I want the glue and the alumina to fill in the entire space of that crack. So I have my little dosing bottle here, and you'll see the glue runs That's why we want the paper, because while this dries, I don't want it to stick to the table. And now I'm going to get down real low, and we've done all the work to pick out the right size. You really got to use some careful eyeballing in here. Let me do this demonstration. And drop this thing right on there. And since you've lapped it together, it will stick together pretty solidly, pretty quick. So you want to be pretty deliberate in putting that on there. So now at this point, it's just going to sit. And when that dries, within a couple hours, or you could even wait the next day if, depending on how you set up your glazing, you'll have a nice handle that you can really hold on to that will hold on to the pot extremely well. So at that point you can use it to dip your crystalline glaze, or you can spray, whatever you want to do. So we're going to let this sit for a minute. Take it and move it with the paper. All right. The other thing, once you've set this up, is, remember we have alumina that's kind of in a fluid state that's just been attached to the bottom of the pot. So if you had glazed your piece first, or if you did like I did and glazed the foot ring, you don't want to turn the pot upside down or anything else, because that alumina can then run on the glaze and it will end up screwing with your glaze chemistry in that region. So let it sit right here and wait until everything is completely dry, and then you'll have a nice foot. If for some reason you find that you've got it on in the wrong spot and you need to get it off, take a thin razor and try to get it right in the groove and pry it off carefully so that you don't chip your piece. It's going to be tough to get them off when you put them on like this, because they've joined on strongly. And so that's it. That is the main trick here. From here, I would pull off the paper. I would take this out, spray it, dip it, brush it, whatever your glazing method of choice is. Maybe it's all three. And if the paper stayed on there, that's fine. I would then take this piece, put it right in the catcher, and fire it right in the kiln like that. And away we go. And if everything goes well, it will come out looking like this. So that's it for now. Please check in for the next video, where I'm going to go over the separation process and how to finish your pots nicely, so you have a nice smooth foot on your piece. Thank you for watching.